How did one of the most powerful men in hip-hop allegedly orchestrate a dark empire beneath the spotlight? And how deep does it go? From the outside, Sean "Diddy" Combs was untouchable, an icon, the kind of man who redefined what it meant to succeed as a black man in America. The Grammy wins, the record label, the fashion empire, the global respect. He had made it, and made sure everyone knew it. But power is a mask that fits easily on a broken face. Beneath the surface of his billion-dollar image, forensic analysts now suggest lay something altogether darker, something fractured. His early childhood was shaped by trauma. Born in Harlem in 1969, Sean lost his father, Melvin, at just 2 years old, shot dead in a drug deal gone wrong. That moment, experts say, left a mark deeper than any scar. Growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, raised by a hard-working single mother, young Sean learned quickly how to navigate chaos. He didn't cry. He calculated. A forensic profiler consulted by prosecutors described Combs as someone likely exhibiting traits of narcissistic personality disorder, extreme grandiosity, entitlement, and a need for total control. But over time, they say, those tendencies warped into something more dangerous, a covert predator masked by charisma. What you see isn't what you get with men like him, the profiler notes. You see charm, but underneath, there's often something hollow and hungry. In private, Combs cultivated a life ruled by strict rules and darker rituals. Friends described a man obsessed with image. He was known to make his assistants test out his deodorant, line up his shoes by color, or rewrite scripts for his award speeches until they were flawless. One former employee claimed he wasn't just trying to control his world, he was trying to rewrite reality. And into that world stepped dozens of young women, dreamers, performers, influencers. Some were flown out on private jets. Others met him through industry parties or music video shoots. To them, Diddy wasn't just a name, he was the gatekeeper. And gatekeepers, when unchecked, become gods. One survivor, her voice distorted for protection, shared what began as a networking dinner ended with her locked in a room she hadn't entered willingly. Another described being told she would be blacklisted if she didn't play along. If you say no to him, she whispered, your life is over. These weren't isolated incidents. Not according to prosecutors. Combs allegedly hosted what insiders called freak-offs, elaborate parties that blurred the lines between fantasy and psychological warfare. Women were allegedly plied with drugs, manipulated with promises, and then ushered into rooms with strangers. Some reportedly paid performers, others more ambiguous figures. In the words of one lawsuit, it felt like he was playing God, like he was watching us from somewhere, and none of us had a say. But how does a man so publicly celebrated, so relentlessly adored, live such a double life? The answer, forensic experts say, lies in his obsession with domination, not just of women, but of reality itself. It's about the high, said a retired profiler. Men like him aren't driven by lust. They're driven by power, breaking boundaries, seeing how far they can go. And if the world lets them keep going, they go further. The mask is slipping, and what lies beneath is not the mogul, the mentor, or the music legend. It's the predator. And the central question now echoes louder than ever. How deep does it go? What else have we missed, ignored, or dismissed in the name of celebrity? As the trial looms, the illusion begins to fracture. They all came for a chance. A feature in a music video, a record deal, a seat at the table in an industry that rarely opens its doors. Some were models, others were dancers. Many came from small towns with even smaller options. They weren't just chasing fame, they were escaping something. Broken homes, poverty, abuse. They thought Sean Combs could save them. Instead, they vanished, First from the red carpets, then from public view. The prosecutors have compiled a list. Nearly 24 women, at least. Some have come forward in civil suits, others anonymously. But all their stories follow a chilling pattern. They met Diddy through parties or intermediaries. He offered them visibility, money, or mentorship, once inside his circle. However, they say the rules changed. One woman, referred to in court documents as AJ, was just 19 when she met Combs. According to testimony, she was flown to his Miami estate for what was described as a creative weekend. She never returned to her modeling career. Another, Lena, claimed that Combs offered her a contract with Bad Boy Entertainment. Instead, she says she was taken to a compound in Los Angeles where her phone was confiscated and she was instructed to follow instructions or lose the opportunity. Victim advocates call it a grooming pattern. Prosecutors call it psychological entrapment. The central question, how deep does it go, keeps resurfacing as more women come forward with allegations of surveillance, coercion, and silencing. According to insiders, some of these women were allegedly monitored, their movements restricted, their relationships severed. In one chilling account, a former assistant claims he was instructed to delete security footage following an incident that left a young woman hospitalized. Yet for years, their disappearances from the spotlight were barely noticed. They just stopped posting, one influencer said. No farewell, no announcement, just gone. The profiler's insight cuts deeper in this chapter. Men like Combs, they suggest, don't just abuse their victims, they erase them. Not physically, but socially, digitally, psychologically. They become ghosts. And the machine, the music, the parties, the headlines keep spinning. Why didn't we notice? Why didn't we ask where they went? Because in Combs' world, silence was the cost of admission. But the silence is cracking. And as we pull at the threads, more names begin to surface. More stories. More shadows. It wasn't one of the parties. It wasn't a scandalous video or a leaked text. It was a raid. On March 25th, 2024, federal agents stormed Sean Combs' homes in Los Angeles and Miami. Heavily armed, coordinated, swift. The search warrants were sealed, but insiders later confirmed this wasn't about drugs. It was about trafficking. What they found inside wasn't what anyone expected. Surveillance rooms, dozens of hard drives, locked chambers, soundproofed spaces. One investigator called it a fortress designed to observe, record, and erase. There were diaries, names, times, graphic footage, allegedly showing the exploitation of multiple women. And perhaps most chillingly, maps with coded notes that federal analysts are still deciphering. One lead agent, speaking anonymously, said, "It felt like we weren't just entering a house. We were walking into a system that had been running for years." Even the staff seemed confused. Some claimed they thought it was all for security. Others refused to speak entirely. One maid reportedly fled the country days after the raid. But in the center of it all, prosecutors say, was Sean Combs, directing the flow, pulling strings, watching from behind the curtain. And now the evidence speaks louder than any defense. A former tech contractor came forward, stating he had been hired to install proprietary surveillance infrastructure across multiple properties, some of it hidden even from guests. When asked who the cameras were meant to monitor, he replied, "Everyone, always." The profiler's analysis became even darker. Control wasn't enough for him. He needed omniscience. He needed to feel like a god. Among the evidence, investigators found a locked vault. Inside were documents, non-disclosure agreements, handwritten notes, photos, some dating back nearly 2 decades. Some victims were as young as 17 when their entries began. It's no longer about allegations. It's about what's physically been uncovered. And yet, the central question, how deep does it go, continues to stretch further. Because the vault was only the beginning. Power doesn't just protect monsters. Sometimes it creates them. To understand the motive behind what prosecutors now call a network of systemic abuse, we have to go beyond the headlines, beyond the music, beyond the myth of the mogul. We have to understand why a man who seemingly had everything still needed more. Control, more silence, more submission. And the answer, forensic psychologists say, lies in a single word: domination. According to experts brought in to help construct the government's psychological profile, Combs didn't just crave attention. He craved compliance. Not adoration, but obedience. His childhood trauma, paired with sudden fame, built a dangerous cocktail. A man who equated love with control and identity with empire. For narcissistic abusers, one profiler explains, reality becomes a canvas, and the people around them, just tools. You don't have relationships. You have roles. Inside the walls of his estates, multiple witnesses claim, Combs played out elaborate fantasies of control, from strict schedules for his staff to silent rituals performed before freak-off events. He allegedly orchestrated every detail. One assistant described being required to enter rooms only when summoned via an intercom, never knocking. Victims say he didn't want company. He wanted choreography. And for every broken boundary, every twisted act, there was always the same whisper behind it. You owe me. Prosecutors believe that Combs saw himself not as a man, but as a system, a god within his own creation. He chose who rose and who disappeared. He controlled the music, the parties, the narrative. But when power metastasizes into pathology, the need for control becomes compulsive. He created a universe where no one could say no, says a legal analyst, where consent wasn't real, because choice was never an option. Insiders have begun to talk about the hidden tiers within his inner circle. Levels of access, loyalty, and silence. Newcomers were assigned mentors. Rules were enforced by peers. Even punishment, some claim, was socialized. Exile from the house, public humiliation, revoked privileges. It wasn't just abuse. It was infrastructure. Some survivors describe being offered gifts, bags, cars, rent money, in exchange for silence. Others were simply reminded of what they had to lose: careers, safety, freedom. And this, prosecutors argue, is where the motive emerges most clearly. Not lust, not impulse control. The goal wasn't pleasure. It was power over perception. And that's what made it so effective for so long. Diddy didn't just want to do dark things. He wanted to be seen as untouchable while doing them. It wasn't enough to win the game. He had to own the board. And in the words of one whistleblower, he didn't think the rules applied to him. Because for years, they didn't. Now, for the first time, they just might. Because motive isn't just about what a man does. It's about what he needs. And in this case, what he needed was everything. They were the stylists, the bodyguards, the managers, and the makeup artists. The people who were always there, but never truly seen. They moved through the rooms with lowered gazes. They took the phones. They signed the NDAs. They booked the flights, adjusted the lights, fetched the drinks, and kept the music going. They were his inner circle, and many of them now claim they saw more than they ever wanted to. One former tour manager, known publicly only as David, broke a decade of silence in a sealed deposition. His words are now with federal prosecutors. He had rules, not just for the girls, but for us. What you could say, where you could go, how you looked at him. If you broke those rules, you were gone. No warning, just replaced. Others have described similar atmospheres. An environment built not just on fear, but complicity. Assistants were told to deliver pills without asking questions. Drivers were instructed to drop girls off and not wait. Security guards were paid in cash and made to sign fresh confidentiality agreements every few months. One even admitted to installing locks on interior bedroom doors, but only from the outside. "You knew not to ask questions," said a former chef. "You just did your job, or you disappeared." But silence, investigators say, is a form of participation. Some insiders have flipped. Others are under pressure to cooperate, now caught between shielding their former boss or facing obstruction charges themselves. And those who stayed close for the perks, free luxury, fame by association, are now facing a new question. What did you know? And when did you stop caring? Federal agents have begun mapping the organizational structure behind Combs' empire. Not the public-facing music and fashion entities, but the unofficial one. The machine that handled entertainment, special guests, and client relations. Some of the same names keep surfacing in survivor testimony. Not just Combs, but his top aides, his enablers, and one name, still sealed from the public, was allegedly the handler, the one who screened women before they were ever allowed near Combs. A former dancer, speaking anonymously, said, "She asked us questions, like if we'd ever been abused. If we were loyal, then she'd smile and say, 'You're going to do great.' I thought it was weird. Now I know it was sick." This wasn't just a man acting alone. This was a network, one that protected him, served him, watched him, and did nothing. The profiler's conclusion grows more damning. The greatest monsters don't hide in shadows. They hide in crowds. They surround themselves with people who need them, fear them, or owe them. That's how they stay invisible. Now, some of those smiles look different. Not joyful, but haunted. Because when the illusion collapses, it doesn't just expose the villain. It exposes everyone who stood by and let it happen.